What's interesting, for people who say, why is Yemen hitting Israel? Israel has a shared military base on sovereign Yemeni territory on the island of Socotra and the Socotra archipelago. And that has been there for years. If you want to say who fired the first shot, it was Israel who fired the first shot at Yemen. And so, Yemen is fully justified in its alliance. It's fully justified in its actions. And it looks like Yemen is set to escalate. They also claim to have hypersonic missiles, which we haven't seen, but those can reach Israel if in fact they exist within 10 to 15 minutes, and no intercepting missile can take those down.
Now, that would be an interesting development, which raises another question that I have about how a regional escalation would look like between Israel and its regional allies like Morocco, Jordan, Egypt, and the Gulf Arab states, which have effectively helped Israel circumvent that Red Sea blockade, versus the axis of resistance.
I don't think the Arab allies who have friendly relations with Iran and other members of the resistance axis, don't forget Syria is the one Arab state in the axis, and most of these Gulf countries, other than Qatar, have been making for the last few years a beeline to Damascus to try to straighten out their relations, reestablish embassies, and some of them are actively lobbying for the removal of the US's Caesar Act sanctions that have devastated Syria's economy. They have good and cordial relations, diplomatic ties with Iran, resuscitated last year by the Beijing agreement, where Saudi Arabia and Iran reestablished ties after many years at odds. It was a sign that the Saudis, under the leadership of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who has his Vision 2030 strategy, a big turnaround, social, economic turnaround of Saudi Arabia, and who is falling behind in his goals. He started the Yemen war, in essence, the Saudi aggression against Yemen with the Emiratis. And after a few years of getting hit by Ansar Allah in Yemen, decided it was enough. He wanted to focus on his real goals. What he thought and said publicly would take days, if not weeks, ended up taking years. And just actually, if you look at the Cradle's feature article today on our homepage, it is about how the Yemenis, in a very short period, made the Saudis kneel in a recent deal struck between Saudi Arabia and Sana'a, where the unbacked government is based. What the Americans, it's believed the Americans had pushed the Saudis to get their caretaker government in Aden to demand that all Yemeni banks are relocated to Aden, and of course, taking control of the airport in Sana'a and stopping flights. And then the Saudis detained a number of Yemeni pilgrims in Jeddah as they were meant to fly back to Sana'a. Yemen went full force on this. I think one of the Ansar Allah leaders just tweeted something like 3 days, okay, which was taken as in 3 days, if we don't get our Hajj pilgrims back, you're going to pay. And you know how we do pay back. We hit your cities, we hit your oil installations, we hit Aramco, we hit your ports, etc. So in record time, the Saudis struck a deal with Sana'a. They reversed course on all of the basically U.S. demands to move banks there. They reopened the Sana'a airport for flights and introduced flights to and somewhere else, Egypt, India, I can't remember, one of those places. So, in that kind of situation, it's very clear that the Saudis are going to great lengths to avoid any kind of confrontation with Yemen. What they experienced with Yemen in years of war was bad enough, but now they're watching Yemen do the unthinkable, take on Israel, which a lot of Arab leaders have long determined is an untouchable state. Oh, no, don't go there. Oh, just bend over, to their demands. Just, humor them, right? Strike deals with them. Do backdoor deals with, whatever placates Israel. Now they're seeing Yemen strike Israel so viscerally course, the Saudis don't want to mess with Yemen. And Yemen is now part of the resistance axis and is part of this fight, indisputably. So what happens if Iran and Hezbollah and Yemen hit Israel? I'm sorry, like who in the Gulf is going to be intercepting Yemeni weapons and to what result, right? Of course, Jordan has sounded off again about nobody's going to violate our airspace. Doesn't matter if, Western military aircraft violate Jordan's airspace all the time, and NATO sets up a regional headquarters in Amman, as was just done last month. But no, we're not going to take any Iranian projectiles over our airspace. We're going to shoot them down for the safety of Jordanians. In fact, shooting down, projectiles, drones or missiles over your territory creates a bigger danger for your civilians than letting those projectiles fly overhead to their destination, as we saw in the last round in April. So Jordan looks set to participate in this. And now Ayman Safadi, the Jordanian foreign minister, was just in Iran yesterday, day before, and we're yet to see what the results of that was. I mean, for certain, the Russians and the Jordanians have and others, many others, through phone calls or actual visits to Tehran, have been urged by Western capitals to try to get Iran to minimize, to do a limited retaliatory strike. Iran has doubled down after these visits and said, no, we're going to do what's right. And so we'll see if Jordan participates. I think it was a real shame and stain on Jordan for having defended Israel militarily in April. And we'll see if they continue to go down that wrong trajectory, because they do have an option of just sitting it out. But I doubt Arab states like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, the two most powerful Gulf states, will participate in anything against Iran. Iran has warned these states, as they have during the April strikes, and also before their retaliatory strikes for the U.S. assassination of General Qasem Soleimani and Iraqi General Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes. They've warned their neighbors that if they allow the launch of a single fighter jet, drone, or missile from their territory, that they will be legitimately considered targets for Iran. And I think most Gulf countries have taken Iran, at its word. I know after the April events, where it was very clear Jordan participated, it was always an American throwing in, and Saudi Arabia and the UAE, though it's not clear at all how they participated. If, they would then caveat it by saying, well, they provided, surveillance and reconnaissance data. But keep in mind that the surveillance and the top-notch reconnaissance and surveillance data in the Gulf countries are American ones in American centers run by Americans. So while the information may have come from these countries, it wasn't necessarily by the governments of these states, but rather the American bases in these countries.
Okay, I want to go back to Lebanon. In response to the killing of Fuad Shukr, Hezbollah has said that the war has entered a new stage. What exactly does that mean? And then do you know what tactics will be used moving forward?
Nobody knows. I mean, that's a short answer, and nobody who says they know actually know the full range of it. I mean, one of the things about this axis, and I don't know if your reporters or yourself have come up against this. I mean, everything from this axis, very hard as the journalist to get something new and information from them. For them, every bit of information is on a need-to-know basis. And why would you tell a journalist? So when you see Western media, quote, unnamed Hezbollah fighters or Hezbollah commanders, it's a joke. We actually know a guy in Dahi, in the Beirut suburb of the southern suburb, who for years used to, during the entire Syrian war, for instance, used to set up meetings with fake Hezbollah commanders for the top US and British media outlets. Like, one day we're going to do a story on this, because it's so bad, it's embarrassing. So it's very unclear. The Cradle did do our front page story yesterday, was that an actual Hezbollah source had told our journalist that the strike would be simultaneous. A strike, a retaliatory strike for the assassinations by Hezbollah, Iran, and Yemen would be simultaneous. Now, we didn't even know how to present it because, is this true? Does this person know? Why would they tell us? Do you know, like, you get paranoid if someone in the Axis tells you something, you're like, wait a second, why are they telling me this? You know, but it was our duty as journalists to report what was said by a Hezbollah source. It wasn't a person close to the organization. It was from the organization. And who knows, maybe it was a diversionary tactic where they used the media, and we won't go back to that source in the future, do you know? But in terms of how they will respond, many people have talked about the various target banks that could be used or, targeted in this scenario. Anything from obliterating Israeli military bases, airstrips, service infrastructure, gas fields, right? There's even Tel Aviv, though I seriously doubt it would be like bombs on Tel Aviv. It would be something significant, a qualitative target in Tel Aviv, just to show that they are prepared to hit the city so that Israel doesn't hit Beirut, right? So, I mean, that may be shown. The other thing that's possible is that we will see new weapons being employed by the resistance axis in this phase of the war. Okay, so new target banks would be one thing we're looking for. New type of weapons that we haven't seen in combat before being utilized is another potential scenario. During the Iranian strikes on Israel on April 13th and 14th, a lot of Western experts and commentators immediately rushed to pass judgment and say it was an absolute fail. We hit down 90% of their, incoming projectiles. Whereas in fact, anybody genuinely in an army, in a military command, knows what Israel did was collect critical intelligence on their adversaries that night. They sent a lot of slow-moving drones, right? Slow-moving projectiles that took like hours, like 9 hours to reach their destination. But enough of them that Israel and its allies in the Americans, the French, the British, and Jordan would have to deploy their air defense systems, and Iran could see where these projectiles, the air defenses, were coming from. They were also able to see which countries would participate to defend Israel, where UK aircraft and American aircraft would take off from. Would they take off from the 2 UK bases in Cyprus? Would they take off from Saudi Arabia? Would they take off from Jordan? So that was a recon operation. And interestingly, the missiles used many of the missiles had these sort of decoys. They would shoot off multiple decoys, each which would be targeted by Israeli air defenses. Depleting Israeli air defense missiles. They say Israel spent $1.3 billion that night, whereas Iran spent like 2% of that. And so there were so many aspects to that Iranian operation. But here's the thing. So a lot of decoys were employed, meant to be intercepted by air defenses, while the actual targets, which were 3 Israeli facilities, 2 air bases, and 1 intelligence facility in the Golan, were all struck. Iran struck all its targets that night. These 3 facilities were targeted because they had all participated in the operation to strike Iran's consulate in Damascus, which is what this retaliatory strike was for. So in that sense, I would be seriously disappointed, Mnar, if I was surprised by this, because I mean, it's like military as art, the way they're responding, the shock effects, the surprise, their ability to use the military or military operations to achieve either deterrence or a political outcome. That's what militaries must be used for. So I think I should be on all these components, but how any of it will shape up is impossible to tell right now.
Well, this is my final question for you, Sharmine. The presidential elections are fast approaching here in the United States, and Donald Trump is appearing to be a favorite with the bookmakers to return to the White House. So what do you think a Trump presidency will bring to policy in the Middle East?
We can only judge by Trump's first presidency. I mean, he was the US president to greenlight the assassination of Iran and Iraq's top military commanders, which really shocked the world. This was a no-go zone. He crossed all red lines there. But in some sense, I think Trump is just like, in a way, George W. Bush, a kind of useful idiot, right? Like not steeped in knowledge, strategy, history, enough to actually think for himself. So listens to a lot of people. And at that point, he had Jared Kushner's ear, and Jared Kushner is all about Israel. And so it was easy perhaps to get into Trump's ear to kill this Soleimani fellow. You know what I mean? I mean, I kind of envision that's how it played out. The thing that I can say based on his presidency is we did see a sitting U.S. president, the first in many consecutive U.S. presidents who did not launch a war. Okay. He tends to think wars are not that important, that actually the right way. He thinks strike a deal instead of going to war. Okay. So this is the businessman mentality. He wrote Art of the Deal. And so he's like, I'm going to go in there and strike a deal that's going to benefit the U.S. The other thing is Trump doesn't like to spend U.S. dollars in foreign countries. He's said that many times, and he's demonstrated that he's willing to pull the rug out from under his friends at NATO by saying, we're not going to keep carrying you guys. Give us 2% of your budget for NATO, or we're out of here. Right. So that's part of the art of the negotiation, but he tends to want to go that route with adversaries rather than a military route. It's not a field he's familiar with. Many of the generals he liked are people who thought America's wars were dumb, and it's time to get out.